Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another panel. And I've got another group of wonderfully esteemed guests, returning champions, most of them to this channel. Wonderful to have you here, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, your time, or this morning, mine and Peter's time. And we've got, I think, a rather interesting topic to talk about today. What we're going to be talking about is what I've just deemed as sugar hit albums. So the idea of a sugar hit album is an album that when it first came out or when you first listened to it, you absolutely fell in love with this album. But then as the years have gone by, you've realized that maybe it's not such the classic that you thought it might have been in the first place. It doesn't necessarily mean you hate it now. It just means you realize that it's not such a great album after all. So that's what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to go around the panel. Everybody's going to pick one album that they feel is a sugar hit album in that respect. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll go through a couple of honorable mentions. So I'm going to throw it around and I'm going to start with Todd Evans. Todd, always wonderful to have you on the channel. Can you please tell me what your sugar hit album is?
Okay, well, you know, there were some albums that I thought I was going to pick, and then it turned out that they weren't the ones. But this one here, I'm probably going to anger the world's most easy to anger fan base. But 90125.
Ooh.
Oh my goodness.
Now,
oh no.
Oh no.
I was real happy to have a Yes album because I thought it was all over at this point before that came out. But when it came out, it was really exciting because Trevor Rabin, nobody knew who he was, and the production, well, pretty cool. I think of it as just pretty cool now, but at the time it was thought of as groundbreaking and completely new and all that kind of stuff. And it didn't take me long to have to sort of twist myself into a pretzel to get excited about this album, but I kind of feel like Owner of Only Heart is great because it's so different for them, and it's got a really cool drum sound, I've always thought. I used to love Changes. I used to get really excited about Changes, but for some reason it's just, and it's been that way for a long time. It's been that way for like 20 years. It just doesn't do it for me anymore. Cinema, I never really liked all that much. Leave It, I thought was great, and now it annoys me a little bit. Our Song, I'm indifferent to. City of Love, I used to think was really cool because it had kind of a Led Zeppelin Kashmir kind of thing with the big drum sound and everything. And Hearts, I used to really like because it's really, and this might be controversial too, I feel like Hearts, the final track, is the only time this album really has any Yes magic. When you think about classic Yes albums that just transform you into just feeling a certain thing. But when it comes right down to it, Hearts is kind of a little bit too little, too late. And I just feel like there's just not enough happening here. I feel like the album before this is better. I feel like the album after this is better. And so that's mine, 90125. Sorry, Yes, fan base.
No, I mean, that is a controversial one for me because I really, really love that album.
I love that album.
At least you didn't pick drama, thank God.
Yeah,
Oh,
wow.
never.
But he's
No,
created
no,
drama.
No. It's the best Yes album. Yeah.
But no, I mean, I can understand where you're coming from with that. It's not how I feel about the album, but it's definitely, I can understand how other people would feel that album that way. And it was the first Yes album in 3 years. So, people were primed to want to like it. So, yeah, I can see how it would.
That it came out. I went to the tour, went backstage, met Chris Squire. So at the time, I was super, super excited, but hasn't
stood on John Anderson.
What's that?
Stood on John Anderson.
He was the
no,
no-show.
It was there. You just didn't see him. It was there.
I just didn't see him.
He's a short
Just
little
look
guy.
down. Yeah.
I should have got out I have a tour book that's got Chris Squire and Trevor Rabin and Tony Kaye's signature. But
It's an odd
I should have got
little
that out.
assortment. Yeah.
But I remember that the person in front of me gave Chris Squire a piece of the cardboard from a container of wine coolers to sign, and he was very unhappy about that. So that's kind of a fun story that I got to keep from that. But
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Well, thank you for that one, Todd. That's
Sure.
certainly an interesting one to start off the panel with. We'll go
Thanks.
to John Clauser. John, what have you picked as your sugar hit album?
Oh boy, if you thought that was controversial, wait till you get mine. So I remember hearing this, gosh, fifth grade. I guess I heard the initial single from it, and for Christmas one, I think like in 81, I think is when I finally got this album, and for the longest time, this thing was my favorite album of all time. For the longest time. But something's happened with this album over time that it is an absolute chore to get through, save for a couple of tracks. And the one track that is not a chore to get through has one of the most beautiful guitar solos ever in my listening ears has ever heard. You can sing the thing, you can feel every note, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Y'all are going to get comfortably numb with this one.
Yeah. You know, I overlooked that. That should have been an honorable mention for me.
This
It,
The
So I
look
guess
on
that album's
Davey's
not.
face.
So
just
that's not a
then.
brilliant album then.
Oh, no.
We're masterpiece out.
No.
Yeah.
It's one that for me is, like I said, I love this. I used to love this album. It was my favorite album of all time. Something has happened with me where I just can't listen to it. I can't listen to it all in its entirety anymore. I don't know if it's because of Roger Waters and maybe he's just turned me off to everything that is Roger Waters. I don't know if that's the reason. I don't know if it's because I lost sympathy for the Pink character, especially by the time you get to side 4. But the only thing I can really listen to is like Hey You and Comfortably Numb and maybe Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. And that's really about it. The rest of this album, it's just hard for me I just can't listen to it anymore. I don't enjoy it like I once did. And I don't say it is a brilliant album. Don't get me wrong. It's not that. It's just for me, it just doesn't do it for me anymore.
Yeah.
So that's my pick.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
And,
Well,
and
we're
it
on
hurt.
fire.
It honestly hurts me to say that, but it's the only thing I could come up with, and it's really the truth. I just can't listen to it, and I just have a hard time listening to it anymore.
Yeah.
You know,
no.
John, I don't know if you'll relate to this or not, but the way I feel about that album is I would prefer to think about how it made me feel when I first heard it than listen to it again.
Yeah. That's
And
probably how I'll be
I
with
will
it
go on
now.
record as
Yeah.
saying as I love it. It's saying I love it, but I don't ever play it.
Yeah. And
It's just
the,
hard to get through.
that's almost the definition of a sugar hit album, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
the one where you have this nostalgic idea of what it was when you first listened to it, but these days you just don't get that same feeling when you actually listen to the album.
I wonder though how much also is John lives an excessively busy life, and when you're a teenager, you have plenty of time to let these things really soak in. How many albums, especially when you don't have much money when you're growing up and you're a teenager, you cherish those albums that you own and you listen to them non-stop. When you're older and all of a sudden you can buy as much as, well, relatively speaking, as much as you want, and you can listen to as much as you want, even if you can't afford them online, you don't let things digest as much. If I listen to an album 10 times now, that would be the equivalent of me listening to it back in the day 100 times probably.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was my favorite album probably up into my 30s. Maybe even later. But
Wow.
I really think it's been like within the last 5 to 10 years that the album has kind of gone down a lot for me. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what the reasoning is, but that's I have a lot of theories, but that's my pick. So
Yeah. No.
Things
fair enough.
change.
Okay, Davey. What have you picked for your Sugar Hit album?
First of all, thank you for having me. Second of all, I looked at my calendar today and it said Daniel Sugar, and I said, "What the hell does that mean?" So I reverse engineered it, and I don't know. I don't know. It sounded like I was meeting up with some kind of pimp, doesn't it, Daniel Sugar?
Sugar daddy.
so-
Who knows?
Sugar Daniel.
Well, why?
Ah.
Why?
Sugar
Well,
Daniel.
crikey, that's a whole different video for OnlyFans only. But
Patreons.
whoa, crikey.
God.
The notion of the album that you either outgrow or you just leave behind, I had to kind of turn over in my mind quite a bit. And actually, it was Contrarians and the show that I missed the other night that kind of helped push me into my pick. A lot of people know I love this movement in general. Peter, Kerr, and I do a lot of it. Britpop in general, but the biggies, Oasis in the mid-90s, Blur in the mid-90s, I can't listen to What's the Story, Morning Glory, Park Life, Great Escape. I can't listen to any of those, like the big, massive mid-90s Britpop albums anymore. Partially because they're overplayed, and partially because, as one of the greats of non-Britpop, if you will, Mr. Brett Anderson sitting behind me, said, Britpop, when you take a step back, was a very, at times, and I know not a lot of it translated and went to the US, and a lot did to Australia, though, as Peter and I frequently discuss. A lot of it was quite jingoistic, and it was quite insular and flag wearing, and it takes on connotations that now you think, oh, that's not a very good look, you know, wrapping yourself up in the Union Jack and whatnot. It's got rather different connotations. Just a few years after Britpop, when the promise of bringing down a evil empire of a Tory government, led by a musical revolution, and football was coming home, and everything seemed, the summers were all amazing at that point. Everything seemed bright and amazing, and the future was unwritten. Then all of a sudden, the Labour government let us down. Music went electronic again. The Britpop bands started being unusual and different, and everything was a downer. We invaded Iraq. Everything just seemed like the promise had been left unfulfilled. And to go back and listen to those original albums, so take Park Life, for example. Now I just hear it for what the critics of it said at the time, which was, it's just Damon Albarn listening to Ray Davis and rewriting some of the Kinks' best stuff. And I hear in Oasis a lot of the swagger and arrogance and misogyny.
Oh, he's frozen. Oh,
Uh-oh.
he's
Am I
back.
still here?
Yeah, yeah.
Am I back?
You froze
Right,
for
okay.
a bit there.
You went
You-
massage. And that was
If
it.
it misogynistic is
There you
how
go.
that was going to end. So
Yeah.
add on the nistic, right? The whole scene went misogynistic, because how many Britpop female bands were there? Elastica, pretty much it, really. Garbage,
Like
if you want to
Elastica.
count. If you want to count them as Britpop, Garbage. That's really it, to be honest. Catatonia, the British Catatonia, not that Catatonia with a C, with Keris Matthews.
The other one.
Yeah, the good one.
Oh boy.
They're brilliant. There's nothing better than Keris Matthews singing in a Welsh accent. Anyway, but the whole scene for me was just come back to it now just sounds derivative, and it sounds like a downer. And the reason that I'm enjoying so much Peter and I exploring these other Britpop acts is that the best of them, Suede, Pulp, Cast, Ocean Colour Scene, the Blue Tones, they sound like the Charlatans. They sound like they are not part of that movement. They're not part of the arrogance and swagger and jingoism and misogyny and let's just go out and get wasted and blah, blah, blah. It sounds like a treatise on that sometimes, but it never sounds like a celebration of it. So someone like Brett Anderson was able to comment on that kind of, and we'll go into this a lot more in our video, Peter, but someone like Brett was able to talk about that in taking a step back and looking at that style of music, whereas it felt like bands like Oasis, not so much Blur, but certainly they did fall into the trap, were happy to just join in it and celebrate that kind of frivolity, which frankly, looking back, I think there's a reason why Damon had to move on to much better things with Blur, 13, Think Tank, and then ultimately Gorillaz and what he's done since, Good, the Bad and the Queen, etc. There's a reason why Oasis had to split. There's a reason why most of those bands didn't make it out in the 90s, either alive or unchanged. And there's a reason why the best of them, like Brett Anderson, like Jarvis Cocker, have ended up writing books and things, because that was always their skill, was being chroniclers of a scene and not just celebrating it and living at large for the sake of it. So I think in general, Britpop at its zenith would be my pick, but specifically that very laddish culture of the Great Escape, of Park Life, of What's the Story, and of definitely maybe for the big 4 albums from the big 2 of Britpop. So yeah, in a rather roundabout way, that would be my pick.
Yeah, no, that's very thorough and very excellent. Where would you put Supergrass in the sort of Britpop kind of?
They would definitely fall under the category of being celebratory because they were teenagers at the time, but also able to take a step back and chronicle it, because Gaz, to this day, makes wonderful solo records, absolutely phenomenal solo records. His album from this year is fantastic. He's matured as a songwriter, and wasn't ashamed at the time to just write songs that were about being young and happy. They weren't about the cigarettes and alcohol, the rock and roll hedonism, about, you know, women were only objects, none of that kind of nonsense. So Supergrass to me were kind of half and half, but on the side of the Angels, if you will.
Yeah, fair enough. Great. No, that was wonderful. Grant, what did
How do you
pick
follow
for your-
that up?
Well,
Holy
yeah.
crap. That was great, Davey. Of course, Davey's always great. Well, this is going to be controversial because originally I could have picked many of these records. It's more like a body of work that I just can't sit through, but I'm going to pick one. Now, this record back in the day, this is considered a classic. In fact, a lot of these are considered classics. He had a span all through like the late 70s, clear to like probably 82, maybe. I mean, there are tons of great records, but I've got the whole catalog right here. These are all the Rhino CDs, which are phenomenal, all 2 CD sets. But we're going to go with Elvis Costello, and I might as well pick the first album. I'm just going to pick it. I know.
What?
See, I told you it's going to be controversial. I went
No,
and
that
saw
one,
Elvis.
no. No, that
Okay,
one.
come on.
I talked to Scott about this. I'm Scott. Jesus, sorry, Todd. I saw Elvis last year on the Boy Named If tour.
Brilliant album.
Elvis was absolutely horrible, and he it kind of tarnished it for me because he reinterpreted all these songs. Everything was drawn out. It was kind of slow. I mean, he did like radio, and you wouldn't even know it's radio. But I used to love this record. Loved it. Played it all the time. Maybe I overplayed it. But now at this point in my life, I appreciate this. I think a lot of this is great. Or I did. I just can't listen to it anymore. I know that sounds sacrilege. And I know I'm going to get hate mail. I told you it's going to be controversial.
Writing some hate mail.
Peter
Yeah.
Curzon,
You're
write
starting
that.
early.
What's your address,
Please.
Grant? What's your address? I'm just
More
writing
thumbs
it.
down. That's what I need.
Oh,
Got a
But-
pen.
I just don't know where to begin.
It's a great record. Don't get me wrong. This is a great record. this is a great record. See, there's all these great records, but I just don't listen to them anymore.
No,
They
it's
just
fair
sit
enough.
there. Now, I'm not sure. Well, the thing is, this is what's going to be funny. There are still some more of these Rhino 2 CD issues that I still need for my collection. I still probably would buy them. Idiot me if I saw them to complete the collection because it's a sick psychosis. But I mean, I'll keep them. Maybe I'll come back around. But for some reason, it's kind of like The Wall. It's kind of like with John Clauser and The Wall. Love these albums, but for some reason, I just can't get into it. I can listen to them, but it just doesn't. I'm just like dead inside. It's weird. I don't know why. I don't know why.
If I was going to pick one that I would say that about, I mean, I disagree with you, but if I was going to pick one, it would be that one. It would be the first one. But like I listened to Armed Forces today, so they're still in rotation for me.
Yeah.
So
They're not in me, but there's only one Elvis album that I can still play and I do not get tired of, and that's Spike. Believe it or
Yeah,
not, I think freaking Spike's brilliant, and I can still listen to it. Go figure. How weird is that?
That's more contrarians than the contrarians.
Yeah,
I know.
I couldn't tell you an Elvis Costello song if you paid me. I've never listened to him.
I just don't have any interest in listening to it anymore.
Yeah.
It's all right.
We'll do it in our next rock review, John.
So I want to
I'll assign you
apologize.
one.
I want to apologize to the Elvis Costello community. I think he's great. I just
Let me finish my letter.
This is gonna set
Great.
the internet on fire.
The reason that Elvis would never occur to me is because his catalog is so diverse that there would always be an Elvis no matter what
Yeah.
came in.
Tired of it.
So if I'm not in the mood for the debut, then I might be in the mood for King of America because it's completely different records.
or
You know, I'm not going to
or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not going to confuse the jazz stuff with the country stuff. You know, I mean, literally, I referenced that "Good Year for the Roses" about 10 minutes before we started. That's really weird that Grant picked Elvis Costello.
I don't mind that record so much.
Yeah, I mean, Elvis is, you know, and I love some of the later records. I love The Delivery Man from 2003. I think that's a fantastic record. But yeah, you also make the interesting point, though, that sometimes a live experience that you didn't enjoy, for whatever reason, can put you off the artist for a while. You know, you just need a time away. You need a trial separation. You know?
Yeah.
I might need a couple more years because I thought I wanted to leave, but I was there with a friend of mine. I drove, but you know, he's one of those hardcore guys. He's going to sit through it either way, but he didn't like it either. And he's hardcore Elvis. And I was hardcore, but it just seemed like Elvis was going through the motions. A lot of people at the show liked it, but it just, I don't know, took it away from me. It's sad, but maybe it'll come back around. I may come back. You know, you never know.
I saw an Elvis show where he had the chocolate wheel, and you basically
I saw that.
It was brilliant. You brought an audience member up, and they would spin the wheel, and he'd play a song off the bat, and that had a lot of spontaneity, interaction with the audience, and he was on. But I hear about Elvis. Sometimes he's on, sometimes he's off. But every time I've seen him, he's been on. So you must have had a dud night. That's unfortunate.
All the tracks sounded the same. It was like a continuous track. I mean, that happened. That happened when he was touring the Burt Bacharach stuff, where everything was reinterpreted in that kind of style, and it was like, oh, some of this just wasn't written in that style, Elvis. You know, come on, Declan, get it out. I mean, what's going on here? You know, yeah, some of it, yeah, and also he's one of those guys. If you read interviews with him, it can actually put you off sometimes because he can be a bit of a curmudgeon, you know. Yeah.
Well,
So
a lot of that
it is what it is.
Yeah.
A lot of that presentation of a lot of that music has to do with youth, and he's just not the same energetic dude that he was.
And a lot of
then.
those artists like that. It's almost hard to go see their later work or their later shows because they aren't the same person, and it can tarnish everything that you've got. You know, your reference point in your mind.
So when you're saying a long continuous track, so like the later Talk albums?
No. Well, I mean,
just kidding.
Right, I know what you're
Peter's
saying.
gonna write
but
another letter now, John.
Yeah.
I love
Peter's
those
going to be
Talk
busy
albums.
tonight.
I love those
It's gonna
Talk
be-
albums. I'm just
I
kidding.
love Talk too.
Well, Peter,
Pedro's buying some
Peter,
stamps.
before you get into writing that next letter, how about you tell us? I believe Peter and I did a show a couple of days ago on his channel, which I believe has just come out. So go and watch that. It's on the wonderful New Zealand band My Sex. But we were talking in between, and he was talking about his choice that he was going to come up with, and I believe it's something quite different. So Peter, let us know what your choice is for. Well, it's not so much a sugar hit album, is it? As much as it is a.
I'm actually
well,
going
I'll let you tell it.
I'm going to slam a genre of music. So in the early 90s or the late 80s, there was a genre of music where there were more pork pie hats and berets coming out of the woodwork than you could poke a stick at. It was a combination of jazz, funk, and hip hop. And I'm talking about acid jazz. I'm out of love on acid jazz. I used to buy a lot of albums. Jamiroquai, Brand New Heavies, a band called Incognito. It's really a sort of genre of music for the cafe latte set, and it was very hip and happening at the time. But I'm telling you, in 2023 years, it's a little bit soulless, it's a little bit pseudo try hard. It created a whole sort of genre of going out on a Sunday afternoon called the recovery session, where you would have some hipster with a turntable and a saxophone and somebody trying to rap with this sort of like pseudo jazz music. So I don't know if it was big in the States. It was definitely big in the UK, Davey, but I find that sort of genre of music, I can't listen to it anymore. And Jamiroquai, he's probably the biggest, he's probably the king of the heap. He had a huge hit out here called Emergency on Planet Earth. And you listen to it now and all the lyrics sound like slogans. It's not actually songs, it's actually slogans. And look, some of his stuff is decent, like Canned Heat. I still get a little bit of a rush of that. It's got that Studio 54 with the strings. But I find a lot of this genre is just very soulless and there's not much depth to it. And it was something that was very sort of hip and happening in the late 90s, but you know, in your musical journey, you move on. And alas, to these 23 years, I find I don't really go back to a lot of these albums in this genre, like the Brand New Heavies, et cetera, et cetera. So sorry if I offend anyone.
I've not even thought about the brand new heavies. I've not even thought about them since about 1998, Peter. That's amazing.
I don't think anyone else does. I don't think anyone else does. It was very popular for a period of time, but I think it's just one of those fads that's completely gone. And
they had a big hit with their cover of Midnight at the Oasis. I remember that. You're right. It was that was a scene that almost didn't need a vinyl comeback because vinyl never disappeared for those kind of hipsters. It always did. They never had a comeback. It's like a bit like Britpop. It was very much the worst excesses of it didn't have any depth whatsoever once you take some time and step back. And JK was the lead singer of Jamiroquai. Just it epitomizes that. There was nothing underneath the surface. It was that big hat and not much else.
Picking up snippets of 70s soul music, but without the soul. It was like soul without soul. They sucked the soul out of soul music.
But not the Al Green soul, more like the Gil Scott Heron version of soul with
pseudo soul.
Well, Brett,
strange.
Was there any bands like that? Any like Todd, John Clouds? You remember back in the day anything like that in the States that really took off?
Jamiroquai, I remember. I was living in California.
I've heard of him. I've never heard him.
I mean, I heard of Jamiroquai, but I that was never my thing. I was always a metalhead for pretty much.
I just don't remember anything from that era.
I just remember I didn't like Brand New Heavies, so
they ended up on like the Godzilla soundtrack and things. So that tells you what you need to know, really, doesn't it?
Sort of the soundtrack
on Godzilla.
Yeah, sort of the soundtrack for stockbrokers.
Yeah.
Going out on a Friday night.
But at the
Yeah.
time,
Beautiful
Cool,
people
right?
with the martinis.
but at the time, Peter, you
American
were
Psycho.
really into it, weren't you?
Oh well,
Yeah.
you go through phases.
American
I could've-
Psycho.
I could have tried Italian house music too,
Yeah.
Black Box, but I'll maybe honorable mentions. I don't know.
All right.
I don't know.
Well, I'm going to go with an actual album, and I'm going to be bringing back one of the artists that we've already talked about tonight, but I'm going to be talking about a different album by this artist. Pink Floyd were a band that I got into as a teenager, loved all in Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here and all that sort of thing. And it had been a while since they put an album out, and I was so excited when they finally did, and they put out this album, A Momentary Lapse of Reason. I loved this album when I was 16 years old. Absolutely loved it, adored it. Went and saw them on the tour. The tour was fantastic. I still think that's one of the best concert experiences I've ever had because it was just such a spectacular show. But I go and I listen to this album now, and it just does not stand the test of time at all, does it? I mean, there are a couple of good tracks on here. Sorrow I think is still a pretty good track. I still quite kind of like Learning to Fly. But I mean, things like The Dogs of War and One Slip. On the Turning Away is just so saccharine now, isn't it? I mean,
I loved it so much when it came out.
Yeah, same here. Like I was 16 years old when this album came out, and I just absolutely adored all of it. But now I listen to it, and it just is not a great Pink Floyd album at all. I still have, there's still a sentimental value to this album to me because of what it was to me when I was a 16-year-old and when it came out. But when I'm judging it in the cold light of day, it just doesn't stand the test of time at all. And, that's a bit sad to me, but...
And once you know that it is essentially a corporate requirement album so that Dave can firmly own the name Pink Floyd, and he just had to release an album, that makes it even more corporate and dislikable. Yeah. And then you realize that Nick's on very little of it, which is why the recent reissue was quite good because it actually gave us drums. And everybody goes on about Rick Wright being fired by Roger Waters. Nobody really mentions that he wasn't rehired by Dave Gilmour for that album when Dave had the chance. Yeah. So it's so Dave didn't rehire Rick. So
no, he had him as a session player on the album.
Exactly the same as Roger did. Yeah. Which is so bizarre to me that nobody ever pulls him up for that. And even that picture of them, the three together, Rick's added to that. He's not actually standing with them. That's that's
it. In the actual album cover, he's not there. It's just the two of them.
Yeah, so the one that you've seen that picture with Rick added to it.
Yeah,
that's the one they use now. That was just another publicity still that was added to that and kind of composite. It's so awful. But yeah, it's a bizarre release to me, and to me it's not. It's a Dave Gilmour solo album as much as anything else. And I think people know my opinion about Dave Gilmour solo albums, so I won't go into that. But yeah.
Well, to me, it's not even a Dave Gilmour solo album because on most of his solo albums he does most of the writing.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the writing on this is outside writers.
It's a court mandated Dave Gilmour solo album, which is even worse. Yeah.
Yeah. And earlier we kind of dumped on Roger Waters a little bit. So now we get Turnabout. And the thing that I don't like about that album is that it doesn't have any weight to it. I mean, Roger Waters, you might not like what he's saying, or you might get tired of the message or something like that, but it's got a message. It has some weight to it. And that album just doesn't feel like it's about anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. All right.
Which for some people is obviously great, but
for some people that's better.
Yeah.
Well,
That's why some people love.
The Pink Floyd Yes People and the Elvis Costello crowd are going to have a heyday.
Yeah.
And acid jazz people.
And acid jazz.
I'm not worried about
there are any left.
I
I'm
don't
not
know how
worried
many
about
brand
them.
new heavies.
I don't know
actual
how many
members.
acid jazz people I have watching the channel, but I definitely have Pink Floyd people, and I definitely have Yes people.
There
so
are any you'll hear
and
from
I
them down
definitely
here.
have Elvis Costello people. So
I'm trying
Yeah,
to
should-
get rid of my yes
should-
people, to be honest.
should
there's
should
something
be
on there.
interesting in the comments.
They're difficult people, Davey.
Well,
Okay.
specific, Todd, you watched my video. I said, do not please turn the comment section into is this new
Right.
Yes album a legit album just because of the lineup? First 5 comments, it's not a real Yes album.
Hmm,
That's how you look at it.
Nobody listens to us.
no.
No one. No.
So we've got a bit of time. We can do some honorable mentions. Todd, did you have any honorable mentions? that
I
you
do.
want
I
to-
have 4, and I'll go through them really fast. I promise. Blondie Audio American, all style, no substance. I loved it when it came out. I was sick of it within 2 months. This one hurts a little, but Joe Jackson, Big World, great concept,
Ooh.
super sounding recording. But I just get tired of the songs. His voice grates on you, and it's just there's something about it. It hasn't held up. This I thought was a masterpiece when it first came out. Elton John, The One. I was done with it in like 6 months.
Yeah.
And all my life, I've defended this album, Shaken and Stirred by Robert Plant. I heard
Yeah.
somebody once describe this as the vessel that delivers little by little. And that's kind of what it is. One really great track and a bunch of, I like how weird it is, but the weirdness doesn't stick with you.
Yeah, that one's at the bottom of my Robert Plant list. That's yeah.
Well, you think
I
it's
love
the
a lot of his
production?
catalog, but not that one.
You think it's the production is what kills it? You know, the mid
I
'80s.
like the
You think that has a
production.
lot?
I don't-
Okay.
But I don't think that the songs are very good, except Little by Little, which is amazing.
Oh, it's classic. It's great.
So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. John, did you have any
You know-
honorable mentions?
One actually came to mind, and it was actually when it came out. I remember listening to it about 4 or 5 times, and then after those 4 or 5 times, I was kind of bored of it. Metallica's "Injustice for All."
Ooh.
Oh God, really?
I sort of feel
Yes,
that, John.
after
I
about
sort
the
of
fourth
feel
or
that.
after about the 4th or 5th listen, for whatever reason, I just felt bored with it. I mean, I can go back and kind of listen to some of it now, but it's just not. It is not one I mean, pretty much after Master, I don't really listen to much of anything. I listened to Death Magnetic and Hardwired, and I listened to 72 Seasons once, but boy, no, Injustice for All just bored me after about the 4th or 5th listen. So
Those
that would
songs
be
are
the-
better off on their own.
yeah,
Like if you hear one song, it's okay.
Yeah,
It's a
well,
weird. It's a weird sounding record. You know,
yeah.
production
Well,
wise.
you know,
Yeah, it does.
it,
sound
it
weird.
was just way off base.
Yeah, the bass playing on that album.
But anyway, that's the only thing I could think of as when Todd was
Yeah.
going through his.
Now the
after 6 months, I'm like,
Metallica
well, there's a-
fans. Okay, here we go.
Metallica
Dave-
fans are all over the place.
hmm
Davey, did you have any honorable mentions?
Well, what if we're taking on some big hitters? Let's go for it. Every single
Yeah.
single studio album by the Beatles, every single one of
Oh,
them,
good lord.
every last one of them.
Oh no, Davey's
Every
cancelled.
last
Cancelled.
Oh,
one of them.
he's joking. He's
Right.
joking.
No, I'm not joking. I'm not joking, because if by default you are generally considered the greatest of all time, and I don't consider you the greatest of all time, even if I still think you're great, then I must by default think you're overrated. So I do. So Sgt. Pepper's sounds great, but I don't need to listen to it. It's all in here. The White Album, probably the one I revisit the most because it's nice and eclectic. Even that's all in here. The album I now go back to actually more often is Let It Be, because I love the sound of it. I love the scuzziness of it. It's as close to a garage rock album as the Beatles could come at that point in their career. But to me, I mean, I don't listen to the early stuff pre-Help at all, ever. Why do I need to listen to them covering Smokey Robinson and the Marvelettes and things when I've got Smokey Robinson and the Marvelettes? Help and things like that. Yeah, brilliant, phenomenal stuff. I love Revolver, and I love Rubber Soul. I love the Yellow Submarine song track more than the actual soundtrack, the one that came out in '99. I love the Magical Mystery Tour EPs that make up the two album, or the album. But to me, the Beatles are what the US government call marijuana, the gateway drug, and they just opened a billion different doors. And now when I listen to them, yeah, it sounds great, but the doors that they opened were just so much more interesting in a million different places, are much more my cup of tea. So when I hear the Beatles now, it's like, I don't know, safe would probably be the most operative word. It just feels like a comfort blanket, which, yes, sometimes that's great and it's wonderful and it's lovely to wrap yourself up in. But other times you just think, I know what I'm getting from this. I know exactly what's, and obviously we know what we're getting from every record once we've listened to it a few times. But some albums and some bands are so ingrained in pop culture that you know exactly how it's going to make you feel every single time. And the Beatles are one of them. So for me, the entire studio catalogue of the Beatles has never sounded as good as when I discovered it in the first place. It's been all downhill from there. So it started at such a peak that the only way to go from there was down. Doesn't mean it's in the valley. It just means it's not quite on the mountaintop anymore.
But when you listen to stuff when you're a kid, when, I've talked about that, you hear something and the skies part, the clouds part, the water parts, you never have that. Only very few times in your life. You never, when you hear something back in the day, that you never really listened to it the first time you heard it. If it really
I can still listen to an album right now, and if it hits me hard, it will have me in tears, and I'll feel more now than I did when I was 15, 16. That can still happen to me in a million different ways. So I know exactly what you mean by that. That music does, as we were saying, I think before we came on air, we did say it on air, that it means a lot more to us at that age when we do have less money. And you just have to hold on to these few albums, but to me, it's just, there's so much more interesting stuff at the end of the day that it's not more interesting on a cultural level, but it's more interesting on a personal level, and that's the only way I can really take it. So.
Look, Davey, I mean, I'm the most inveterate Beatles fan that you could ever find, so I obviously don't agree with you, but I can totally understand where you're coming from. I really can. It's not how I feel about the Beatles catalog, but I can understand why it's the way you do. So I think that's just the way so I hope I
wouldn't delete one song from the catalog. Yeah. I'm the guy that defends Wild Honey Pie, Revolution Number 9. I will defend all this weird stuff to the hill, but I just don't need to hear them as much as, I don't consider them the North Star of music. I understand why. Same as Elvis Presley. I love Elvis Presley, but I don't need to have From Elvis in Memphis or Elvis is Back on rotation all the time, To know that they're out there and are always available is great, but I don't need them in my life constantly the way I once did.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Okay,
the way I feel about the Beatles, I'll make this really quick. Yeah, they're cyclical, and I feel the same way about ELO. I will get excited about them for a couple of days, and then they're gone for like 6 months or a year, and then maybe they'll come back, but then they always end up leaving.
Yeah, but they always get back.
All right, Grant.
I think I've done enough damage with Elvis Costello that I don't think I could. I really have nothing more to add.
Fair enough. And finally, Peter, did you have anything? Imagine.
Oh my! Oh, all right, jump on that Beatles bandwagon.
Yes.
Yeah, look, 100%. Imagine's the most overrated pop song or rock song in the history. I think it's mawkish, it's childish, and I just don't get it. Jealous Guy, I prefer the Brian Ferry version. Sorry. I don't think it stacks up this album, and I liked it in the day, but I don't like it. John Lennon, I think a lot of his other albums are much better than that, and I'm sorry, I'm not in love with this album. I think it's a little bit overrated. In fact, a lot overrated.
I'm inclined to agree with you. And I'm a huge John
Me
Lennon
too.
fan, but I definitely don't think that's one of his upper echelon albums at all.
What kills it for me is the production. Phil Spector drives me up the wall. I can't the only album that I like Phil that he did, I don't mind the stuff he did in the 60s, and I don't mind the Ramones album, but all the Harrison and the Lennon albums are just so murky and
no, do you know, I think I'm more with Peter that it's the mawkishness. If Paul McCartney released some of the things that John Lennon put out about his relationships, then people would say, oh, that's just McCartney schmaltz, and they'd deride it. But because it's John Lennon, he gets away with it. But the Lennon estate are skipping Sometime in New York City. They're not releasing that as a big deluxe box hit this year and going straight to Mind Games because they want to play it safe. So they want to embrace this schmaltzy John Lennon. And to me, that's not John Lennon. You know, that's part of him. That's part of John Lennon. But, you know, you have to embrace the women as the of the world and John Sinclair and, you know, these more difficult songs, and certainly, you know, Two Virgins and whatnot. You know, that's part of the story too.
Okay. I'm going to have a couple of very quick honorable mentions. They're albums that I've talked about before, so I won't go into detail. First one I actually did an In Defense of on my channel, but it is definitely not an album I love as much as I used to, and that is Total Devo by Devo. This was their first album in 4 years, and I was a Devo fan since 1981, so I was so excited when this album came out, and I loved it to death. Now it's my, I think, second bottom Devo album. It just doesn't stack up. It sounds dated. The songs just aren't as good as they are on some earlier Devo albums.
What's the bottom? Oh, sorry.
Beg your pardon?
Well, you said second bottom.
Yeah, probably Smooth Noodle Maps is just slightly below it. But the other one is one that I talked about a long time ago. It was the first video I ever did on Peter's channel. And it's one that the Contrarians have just recently covered, and that's Emerson, Lake and Powell. I still quite like this album, but again, this was the first Emerson ELP sort of related album that came out after I discovered ELP. And I discovered ELP with Brain Salad Surgery, which is still my favorite ELP album.
Yeah, me too.
This album, it has its moments, but it just, like, particularly side 2 of this record just doesn't really stack up for me. You know, songs like Love Blind and Lay Down Your Guns are just, they're not good songs at all. So I just don't think this album quite stacks up the way that the classic ELP does. But at the time when it first came out, I was massively in love with it because it was new ELP. So there you go. So those are our sugar hit albums, everybody. Some very controversial choices there. I'll be interested to see what the comments are like. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me for this. It's always wonderful to have you for these panels. I will leave links in the description for my music corner, for Davey's Cinema Flicks and Music Picks, and for Rock Daydream Nation and Grant's Rock Warehouse. I'm sure all my subscribers are already subscribed to these wonderful channels, but in the absolute minute chance that you're not, please go and subscribe to these channels because they are all absolutely fabulous. Please do like, share, and subscribe to this channel. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted. So if you want to look at some of my other panel shows, there's a playlist for that. If you want to look at my studio albums rank shows, there's a playlist for that. If you want to look at my Bicycle Legs Discovers Rush series, there's a playlist for that, and so on and so on. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at Bicycle Legs on Instagram and Twitter. And I also have a dedicated Facebook page now for Bicycle Legs. Links are all in the description. So please come and join those and join in the conversation with me. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
See you later.
See ya. Thanks.
Bye.